All right. And I might as well close the breakout rooms, though I think everyone's here anyway. So, prompt engineering and AI. Before we dive into the lesson itself, who here has used ChatGPT? A good number of people. Who here has used Claude AI? Not necessarily the desktop app, but maybe just Claude AI, period. Yeah, Claude AI is by this company Anthropic, which is another AI company that's basically a competitor to OpenAI and ChatGPT. The tech industry seems to kind of like Claude AI a bit more. I have no idea if it's actually better. I really like the desktop app because it has a nicer user interface for creating markdown files for some lessons. So I've been using Claude and I'm just paying for them because I feel like I have to become familiar with these things as a software engineer. And they're not cheap. It's like 20 bucks a month, but they are incredibly powerful. Um, GitHub Copilot. Anyone here ever used GitHub Copilot? I see a couple hands. Um, GitHub Copilot is an AI coding assistant. GitHub is owned by Microsoft. Um, it is now free, really for anyone. You just need a GitHub account or to have VS Code. I've used it a little, not a lot. There's a programming text editor called Cursor that I think is like, I think it's basically a fork of VS Code that really bakes in the AI coding auto completion. And what ChatGPT can do is pretty incredible. Um, I was messing around with this calculator program to try and figure out the issue here, but let me go ahead and turn on Copilot just to show for a moment some of the things it can do. These are all the things we don't want you to do right now with Copilot because it will do too much. First of all, I can say, write a function to calculate the day of the year based on a number. And ChatGPT will do this too, but it'll write perfectly good code. Um, I'm actually kind of surprised it didn't put it in the editor. There's probably a button I just need to click to do it. Um, and now, of course, I need to figure out how to close the close the chat editor. But with GitHub Copilot, get day of year. Let's see if I get some GitHub autocomplete going here. You know, Copilot might not be on right now. Oh, there it is. Let's see if we have Copilot do this now. Yeah, it's not. Normally it auto completes, but I haven't set mine up. I turn it off for teaching. Um, but point being, these tools are incredibly powerful. Write a Python program for 99 bottles. Then we give it a minute, and it does a pretty darn good job. Now, most of the time, this code is correct. Sometimes it's wrong. Raise your hand if you've heard of the term AI hallucination. So I'm going to talk in a minute about what the heck these AIs that are called large learning models, which is what ChatGPT and Claude are. At a really high level, I'll talk about how they work. Not next week, but the week after, where we'll actually kind of dig in and build our own like baby learning models from scratch. And then later in the lesson, we'll talk about how to write, they call it prompt engineering, but literally just writing good prompts. And some of it relates to kind of the AI stuff, and some of it is just about how to ask good questions. But this term hallucination, I wanted to mention now because the way that these AIs are built, they don't actually understand anything. And I'll kind of break that down in a minute. But what it means is sometimes these things will be wrong. They've even made up stuff. And that's what the term where the term hallucination comes from. And so you cannot trust the output from any of these AI tools to be correct. And there's like some terrible examples out there. You can find some cool examples of AIs like generating images from nothing. Um, Here's a good example. Let's see, this article's from February of last 2 years ago. So ChatGPT is probably a whole lot better now, but the point still stands. This person asked ChatGPT, what's the world record for crossing the English Channel on foot? Now, the English Channel happens to be the large body of water between England and France. So obviously you can't cross the ocean on foot. But ChatGPT invented a person from Germany who crossed it in 14 hours and 15 minutes. Um, let's see here. The world record for crossing the English Channel entirely on foot was set by Christopher Wondrich, blah, 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 blah. The English Channel, also known as La Manche, is a body of water. Let me grab our little annotator. It's a body of water that separates England from France. Many people have attempted to cross the channel on foot, but it's a very challenging and dangerous task due to the strong currents. It's typically done by a combination of swimming and walking, or only swimming. Right? Now, this is not like something that someone made up. This is a known issue with this particular kind of AI that's called a large learning model, or you'll hear the term generative AI, because they do all this incredible stuff, but they're dumb. They're like the world's most advanced pattern matching algorithm you've ever seen. So it makes stuff up that matches the pattern based on the data it's been trained on, is the term. So it gives us good stuff most of the time, but then sometimes it will just be totally wrong and it has no idea if it's right or wrong. And so that's the term hallucination. And that's kind of like the nub of all of this stuff. Because how do I know if what the AI gives me is good or bad?
You have to test it out.
You got to test
Ver
it out
you
for
got to
sure.
verify.
You got to verify it for sure. I got to know enough about the domain, right? I got to like maybe be knowledgeable about history. This one's a pretty obvious example. I got to know enough that I can tell if it's right or not, or that I can verify it. So what it means for us as programmers is that actually like the more skill and experience we get, the more we can effectively leverage these AI tools. But as beginners, it's actually kind of harder. And I did a deep dive on this like a year or two ago for Code Platoon when we were figuring out how to deal with this stuff. And there were all these computer science education studies that confirmed this. Um, Beginners struggle with AI The terms are like shepherding and drifting, where like if you're trying to use an AI to generate code, you're fighting it more than you are actually getting code. Um, the more skill and experience you get, the easier this becomes. Right. So this piece of hallucination is really important. And kind of like this Google Cloud article says, and Google is a good resource on this stuff. The way all of these AIs work that are called large learning models, it's called training. And we'll actually learn how to do this and do this not next week, but the week after. But basically, someone has to take a huge amount of data, like say every history book ever, or a million restaurant reviews on Yelp, and organize and classify all that data into good reviews, bad reviews, happy reviews, unhappy reviews. And you feed it into some fancy math that sort of does semi-random stuff that's like the mathematical equivalent of throwing spaghetti against the wall, and you tell the AI like hot or cold. Like that was, if we're trying to make an AI to like generate restaurant reviews or tell if a restaurant review is good or bad, if they liked the restaurant or not, we need like a million real world restaurant reviews. We need that data to be organized and classified, and then it's called training. And you have your AI model, you feed it all this classified data, and it makes a guess. Like if a review is from a happy or an unhappy customer, and you basically tell it hot or cold, right? And you do that a couple million times, and you have now trained an AI model that does a really good job of evaluating restaurant reviews, or the kind of pattern matching that you need to generate what's called natural language, i.e., English, because language has a pattern because it's language. So these AIs like ChatGPT, they're like the world's coolest pattern matching things that can make predictions by finding patterns in data. But like we see over here, our AI did a great job of pattern matching. This like, it's exactly, if we think of language as a pattern, this sounds exactly like we would expect something like this to be, but they just happen to, come up with a pattern that doesn't exist because it has the AI has no idea. So I realize I've gone on a bit of a rant, and I don't want to underplay like the power and excitement of these things. It really is incredible. But on a certain level, they're deeply stupid. Like for a long time, computer scientists were working on what's called artificial general intelligence, or AGI, which is, when you think of an AI in science fiction, the dream of, a, a consciousness that understands itself. And as far as people know, despite all the noise and hype, these are not that and aren't anywhere close. I'm not an expert on this stuff, but I've followed it for a while and I've worked with some people who are, and and so I think this is all a relatively accurate kind of high level overview. And once we understand that key piece, that, these things require, first of all, huge amounts of real data to do anything and how much effort it goes into. And that's why, like, eh, raise your hand if, you're aware that like Nvidia stock is like going through the roof in the past couple of years. So Nvidia makes graphics cards for like computer games. And I don't know how long ago now, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, some computer science researcher figured out a way to take some of the math that we use to train AI models and have it run on computer graphics cards. And then all of the sudden, you could do so much more training. You could have the AI model throw the spaghetti against the wall so much faster on these consumer graphics cards. And that's a big part of what has driven this sort of AI revolution. And then NVIDIA stock went through the roof. And that's why you now see Amazon, Google, all these companies are making all these data centers, and these really beefy computers with NVIDIA graphic cards to do AI model training because you need massive amounts of data. And a lot of the organizing of this data like was done by humans. A lot of it actually was done by like third world labor, like people in other countries where labor is incredibly cheap, looking at, millions of Yelp restaurant reviews and clicking like good or bad. Um, and then you need to take this data and train models. And then once you have the model, you can have it do stuff. So point being, these things are incredible, but they have limitations. And hallucinations are a part of that, though I'm sure it will get better and better and better. And sometimes the AI is wrong. And this part I don't really understand, but they're not predictable. It doesn't always do exactly what you tell it to do. And if you ask it the same question twice, it won't always give the exact same answer, which is kind of amazing and also kind of deeply weird. But they are dramatically changing certain parts of software engineering. They're probably going to dramatically change parts of education, um, ultimately for the better. The same thing happened when the internet and Google came out. And even with programming, in 1970, if like Python didn't exist, when we had to create a variable, we had to tell the computer like allocate like 8 bytes of memory for this array of integers. Now we have higher level programming languages like Python and JavaScript that do that work for us. And as programmers, we don't have to do manual memory management. But that was a big shift in the field in like the 70s. And a lot of programmers then thought, the new programmers would lose important skills and blah, 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 blah. But it ended up we can do more powerful stuff. No one really knows where all this is going. The optimist in me says we'll end up in a place probably where software engineers can just do more powerful stuff, but it's going to be a sort of long, twisty road to get there. So, um, what does all this matter for all of you? The short answer is ChatGPT is great for certain things. Like I was trying to see what was going wrong with the calculator problem that we have, where I think we have an issue in the code. I think I know what it is, but I want to confirm. And if I want to understand like an error message, um, let me go ahead and run this to get the error. Tools like ChatGPT are great. And I would probably do something like this. And in fact, I was doing this earlier just to get started. Like I'm going to go to ChatGPT and I'm going to say, I have a Python program. It has an error I can't figure out. Help me understand the error message and the cause. So I'm doing a couple things here. I'm giving the AI a role and I'm explaining context. And this is one important part of prompt engineering. I'm also about to structure my prompt. James, yes, sir.
Yes, in your code, do you want to go ahead and get rid of that line that you got at the top of your code? If you go back to VS Code before you run your chat GPT,
Say that again. Yeah.
you scroll up to the top of your code and get rid of that get day of the year and write a
The
function.
get date of year.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you're totally right. That was something left over. Much appreciated. Um, I'm going to structure my prompts. Also, I've told it what language it is. Here is the code. And I don't need to structure it that much because it actually is pretty amazing in this regard. And let me, in fact, delete exactly what you were saying, James. Thank you. And you know what? I am going to put this big line here. I will just say, here's the code. below. We'll put the code there. We'll scroll way, way down. We'll say, here is the test code. And I didn't actually do this in full, so we can kind of get to see how well ChatGPT does with this. And then we can maybe discuss pros and cons. Here is the error message on the command line. I don't think it's actually going to give me the answer. So I was fiddling with this a bit, but I could be wrong. So first off, it looks like I've pasted something in here wrong.
Yeah, that error that you got is from when you ran it with the
Oh, it's
uh,
from, thank you. I see what you're saying. So let's re-put the error message. And so this is correct. And it's actually, I think it is telling me the issue. Though the issue is a bit more complex, so it's maybe a bit less useful. And it does actually a pretty good job of breaking this down. The error we're seeing is because this calculate function is not being printed, which makes sense because if we look at this here, assertion error, we're comparing nothing to a string. And in the test, we're trying to capture the output, but it's giving an empty string instead of this. It's happening. And now it starts explaining what the double underscore main block is in Python, which is a little more advanced, and how we're calling this directly. And since we're not running the same script in the same way as in the main function, the print statement does not get executed. And now it gives me a way to modify the code. But this actually, let's see here. How does it want me to modify the answer?
It's asking you to print, where it says print force, because
Oh,
that's
yeah,
basically that's what I found out last night. That's why how I had to read about the readout error and the captured
right,
out slash error stuff.
right. Actually, I love this because this is terrible advice. Um, this absolutely solves the issue, but it totally defeats the purpose of the test, right? Because the goal of the test was run the program prints something to the command line, and we capture the actual output of our program. But by inside the test printing something out, and Chase, it totally makes sense you would do this because to be honest, the stuff with main and everything is a bit more advanced than we only briefly glanced at the capsys stuff yesterday. So all of this is new to you guys. But we did not solve the issue here. We modified the test to do something other than what we originally wanted it to do. You all sort of see what I'm saying? So this is a great example of how ChatGPT is amazing and dangerous at the same time. This did an incredible job. And frankly, it helps me. Like I use it for stuff like this all the time. It explained the error. It explained what's causing it. Now, did it fix it? Did it make the error go away? Yes. But it did it in a way that modifies the test and defeats the purpose of capturing the output anyway. I mean, I can have this print out whatever I want. This doesn't do me any good because all I'm really doing is confirming that 20 here is 20 here because the rest of this stuff here, this string, I hard code right here in my print statement. Right? And so this isn't hallucination, but this is like the AI kind of not being aware of certain things. And I can that works, but I want the test to actually look at the output of the program. I think it would take a couple more prompts to then get the AI to modify it to a correct answer. Because I think actually like our fundamental program design with the main method may need to be tweaked. And I'm not sure if this stuff with monkey patch and system RV is going to do quite what we want. It might. I would have to look a bit to see if this is like the way that we want to do it. And that's kind of my task for the afternoon, so I can give you guys the working code for the pie testing. So this is better, but you know, for all of you that are just learning this stuff, how much time do you think it's going to take you to figure out if this is right or not? And as we saw here, when we're learning all this stuff just from the beginning, knowing if this is a good answer just because the code runs is not easy, right? And this is where the more expertise you have, the more power and leverage you get out of these tools. So again, to go back to like what's relevant for all of you with this right now, what should I use ChatGPT and these other things for? What should I not use it for? Use it to explain error messages. It did an amazingly good job of that. Use it to explain code you don't understand. There's a lot of things I can get faster with ChatGPT than I can with Google. I think it can do a great job of those things. Don't use the code it generates or the solutions to your problems. If you do, make sure it's for something you understand really well. Right? Because the other analogy I've heard with this, it's sort of like an idiot savant, right? Like from the film Rain Man, it's exceptionally good at some things and just absolutely clueless at others. You will hurt your learning if you rely on ChatGPT to generate code. And if you rely on its solutions, because these tools are just not good enough yet to understand a lot of this context. But in terms of explaining code and explaining error messages, I would say go for it. Absolutely. I think it's incredibly useful in that regard. I would just sort of avoid the code it generates. So that's sort of like, I think, a good example of the strengths and weaknesses of using it. And things like explain main. I don't understand that. ChatGPT is great for this. You know what I mean? This is the amazing part of it. Rather than Googling stuff, and I don't want it to replace you guys reaching out to me or Francisco or James or Max, but I absolutely think it has a role. And again, this is where the more knowledge and skill and experience you gain, the more effectively you can use it to do this stuff. Right? Because there's a lot here that we have to understand. Like we only learned about modules yesterday. So this main thing is actually like fairly advanced. But there's more and more that we can do here with ChatGPT. Like explain monkey patch that we were learning about yesterday. And I think it's taking a minute now because I probably hit my tier, or let's just have it restart. Again, I'm also working on the paid version. So I think you all will also find you may hit sort of like usage limits on the free version sooner. And again, I think ChatGPT can be great for stuff like this, as long as you don't rely on it as the only source of truth, and you're, like someone was saying, running the code to verify it works. You know, I think also looking at the monkey patch docs to sort of do a sanity check is good. And again, with these examples, like these examples are pretty good. though there's some things here I might do differently. But as we saw before, um, if you don't kind of have the domain knowledge, it's very tricky to know if the code samples that are being generated are a good way of doing things or a less good way of doing things. So just use these with caution. And if it's something new, I would run it by a TA or instructor. But for learning and explaining, I think it's absolutely a marvel and a really valuable tool and something that's important to get used to because this is the world that we're in now. And everyone else in the field is using these tools. Um, you don't want it to replace knowledge. There was an article recently saying one of these AI companies, it might have been Anthropic that makes Claude, was hiring for a software engineer role and explicitly said, we don't want you using AI anywhere in the interview process. So, there's we don't want to totally become dependent on it, but look at programmers today. Like if I didn't have Google, I can still get stuff done, but there's a whole lot that I couldn't. I've been doing a lot of talking here, so I just want to check in and see if there are things that people are curious about or have questions about before we dive into some of the more formal parts of the lesson. Okay, and how are we feeling? Does this help set the stage a bit about what these AI tools are and a little bit about their strengths and weaknesses? Awesome. Yeah, and again, they're incredible. Like with Claude, I can say write a React JS to do app, and we give it about a minute, and it'll do it, and it'll do a pretty good job. And this is why I like Claude. I like this user interface that it's doing right now better than OpenAI, and I can copy and paste this code. Um, and we're going to learn all about React.js several weeks later. And now they even have this preview, which frankly, I didn't know they did this. Let's see, does it? I don't know if it actually works, but it's rendering some HTML, which is pretty amazing. Um, on the one hand, this feels kind of scary because it's doing our job for us. On the other hand, this is sort of like the thing that every programmer learns. Um, the real hard part of software engineering is not writing the code, it's dealing with messy existing code that's been around for decades, talking to business people to translate their needs into code. And at a certain point, maybe this means that a company that might not have a software engineering team can hire 2 or 3 people now because they can do so much more. So, and it looks like Anthropic has this very nifty explainer and improver. And again, I'm on the paid account here, so your experience may vary a bit on the free account. But this is why I think like using these to productively aid in learning is really important because you can see how powerful this is, right? But we can't do it blindly because there are real pitfalls here. And also, it's like math, right? Like there are calculators out there, but we still need to know how to do arithmetic and multiplication. And at a certain point, we need to learn to do calculus if we're gonna go into physics or engineering or whatever, even if we're going to use a computer to do all of it. Because our job is to understand how the computer works. And what you all will actually get a taste of a week from now is understanding how Claude AI or ChatGPT works, right? And that's really the cool part. Um, so again, use these tools, avoid having them generate code. Using them to explain is fine. I think that's really good. Using them for error messages is really good. Asking them to explain. I also highly recommend don't copy and paste code. And this is what I do with Stack Overflow too. I'll find code I like on Stack Overflow, but I don't copy and paste it. I type it out because it forces me to think about it. And my rule of thumb when I find code from somewhere that I want to use is I have to understand what every single line does. Again, I would be very cautious in using code generated by the AI tools because it will shortcut your learning. Um, Let me just pause and see if folks have any questions. and then we'll talk a bit more about prompt engineering techniques and what these tools are. So what's on people's minds? Okay, cool. Yeah. At the end of the day, this stuff is exciting. Like you all kind of get to get in on the ground floor. And honestly, people learning programming a decade from now will probably look at the stuff you know and be like, oh my God. Because like back in 1970, if we all learned to program, we would have to learn about memory management and all this stuff and like the guts of how computers work. That like if I look at someone who was programming back then, I'm like, you're a wizard. You know all these things about computers at a low level because Python does all that for us these days. So no doubt it's impacting the job market, and right now it's impacting it negatively. Odds are, as time goes on, our field will continue to grow. Um, so prompt engineering is a series of techniques to like effectively use these AI tools now that we can actually talk to them with plain English, which is kind of incredible. Um, it's useful for generating code if we need to for explanations or anything else. We do have to be careful about how we use it because of AI hallucinations, because the AI doesn't know what it don't know, doesn't know what it doesn't know. As we say here in the curriculum, for certain cases, we can see like biased or undesired outcomes. You all have probably heard the stories of like AIs telling people to do terrible things, right? Um, you also can't convince these AIs to pretend to be people. Um, like I've I've tried, you know, like pretend to be a human and tell me how your day was. And it's going to, they're worried that people, and there are people out there that will lose track of that. This is not a living thing. Um, and so there's certain things hard coded into these tools as well. And there's something called, have you anyone heard of algorithmic bias? I see a couple nods. Yeah. So the classic example is one of these AIs trained to recognize people's faces. And because of the photos that were used and the lack of diversity in them, it did a terrible job at recognizing faces of people of color. I might be getting that example wrong a bit, but it gets at the nub of it. Um, because what these things really are is incredible pattern matchers. They rely on massive amounts of data. And so the quality and kind of the data impacts the algorithm. And that's and these things are really tuned. Um, like there's a lot of manual labor that actually goes into this. And so there's ways that bias can creep into these algorithms. And so that's one thing to be aware of. Um, and just to keep in mind. Um, so large language models basically take a huge amount of real world data, like I said, um, and then they play 20 questions, like hot or cold, and a zillion times over, they throw spaghetti against the wall, mathematically speaking, to see what sticks and see if they're getting closer or further. There's two kinds of large language models. One is called a base large language model. They're trained on really big data sets. They have a large general understanding. GitHub Copilot is trained on code repositories, which was a bit controversial because they trained it on all the code on GitHub, and not all the code on GitHub was licensed by the people who created it to do that. That's another thing. All the companies making these AI models basically have stolen their training data. Once you have a base large language model, you can create what's called an instruction tuned large language model. And ChatGPT and Claude and the other ones like that that you can talk to in the chat window are an example of this, where you take a base model and, excuse me, you do more fine tuning to improve the performance for specific areas. And I think with ChatGPT, it's specifically conversation, right? It's fine tuned for conversational contexts, which means it's really good for as it says here, interactive and dynamic text generation, which is honestly kind of incredible. This is more of FYI information. This isn't going to be immediately relevant, but I think it's good to kind of understand some of this stuff. So, these things are really powerful. The fine tuning especially is pretty cool. Instruction tuned LLMs are really cool. And base tuned LLMs are the basis of all this stuff, and like we see with GitHub Copilot. So this one I think is a really important limitation with ChatGPT. Like the language that you use, like changing one word in your prompt can lead to different outputs. And I don't want to try it out now because I'm not certain I can reproduce it, but you definitely can tell ChatGPT the same prompt and it will give you slightly different answers because the math that creates these things relies on, I don't even know the math well enough to even try, but it's not linear essentially, and some bits of how these AIs work are kind of a black box to people. Um, so we have to, and the thing I love actually to talk about is there was something, I think it's called Code Help. Um, and at one point, I think we were showing this to Intro to Coding and Foundations of Programming students. But frankly, ChatGPT and these tools are so good, I'm not sure it's really worth it. All this does is it's got text boxes, one for the code, one for the error message, one to describe the problem. And then it sends it to ChatGPT along with a whole bunch of prompts. And you all saw me do a very similar version of this a minute ago. And this was something created by some CS professors for CS undergrads. I'll share the link. If someone wants to repost this in Slack, I'd appreciate it if anyone is interested. To be honest, my guess is if we're already here, it's just easier to use ChatGPT at this point. Um, and we can see here, I have a previous query, and you can see that we get this response back. And I was reading about how they made this. And the amazing thing is when you make these ChatGPT bots, you just do it with prompt engineering. You just tell it what you want it to do in English, like I was doing just now. But they would tell it not to send back code because this is designed to help students. And ChatGPT would still send back code even though they told it not to. So they took the output from ChatGPT, fed it back into ChatGPT, and said, get rid of any code. And then they got like a 97% success rate or something in terms of getting rid of code. So these AI tools work in kind of surprising ways and don't always do exactly what you tell them. We talked about algorithmic bias. Lack of real world understanding. We actually saw this in our test example earlier. It did a perfectly good job of making the code correct. It did not have the real world understanding of the intent of that test because I had not told it. Right. And this is where, as users of these things, we really need domain knowledge. Because if we're learning this stuff and we don't have that real world domain knowledge, it's hard for us to see the AI's blind spots. It can also have some challenges with ambiguity. So good and bad practices. I'm just going to kind of zoom through these and then I'm going to show some real world examples. Clarity and specificity. It's important to be clear and specific. And in some ways, it's kind of like writing pseudocode, not code, but in English, kind of what you want the program to do, where we have to be more clear and specific than if it was just you and me talking, but not as specific as actual code. So I would say this is actually a really good way to practice these technical communication skills. Contextual information and giving context is also extremely important. Progressive prompting. This is a big one. I've actually been using these to write drafts of curriculum, of lessons. I'll usually have to spend at least like an hour editing it once I have a good draft, but it actually does a pretty good job of going from 0 to 50. I also have the advantage of the domain knowledge and knowing exactly where I want to end up. But I will like ask it to do something and then ask it to refine it, but I'll also break it into smaller steps. And this again goes back to pseudocode and thinking about problems and program design and how we can break stuff into small steps. The bad practices are relatively straightforward, like vagueness and ambiguity, overly complex prompts, overuse of jargon. This one I like, and actually I'm going to show. So let me copy this and put it into Claude, and let's see what it does. So first of all, this is, kind of an overly wordy sentence, but I want to show this to you guys for a very particular reason. To emphasize the importance of domain knowledge. I totally bombed my physics classes in college. I have no clue if this is right or wrong, right? We basically need to know enough to more or less be able to answer this ourselves to evaluate if this is a good answer, right? This is really like, I already know this, but I've forgotten it and my brain is tired and I want some help. Um, so I just wanted to show this as an example of where if we really have to figure out if this is correct or not, without domain knowledge, it's sort of like good luck. Both of these are just good principles for writing as well. Um, so there's a lot of power to these AI tools, but also a lot of concerns. There's a couple good links here. I'm going to share some other good links as well. I want to do a bit more talking and walking through of our curriculum on this, and then I am going to show a demo. Before I go on to the second part, though, I just want to check in to see if folks have any questions. Okay, how are we doing? Awesome. So, I'm going to move through these rather quickly because I'm then going to just demo them in ChatGPT. So these are really, I do recommend maybe like having this up somewhere as a reference to look at. These are some very useful and straightforward tactics. Um, Clear and specific instructions and format your text. Use backticks. This is how you make a code block in Slack, by the way. Use angle brackets, use dashes. Um, Organize and separate the different parts of your prompt. And you saw me do that in the code example. So it's easier for the AI to see the different bits. You can ask for structured output. And let me just go ahead and run this so you can see this in Claude. Raise your hand if you're familiar with JSON, if you're familiar with the term. Most people are. It might be new to a couple folks. I think you'll know it when you see it. It looks very similar to JavaScript. Let's watch what this does. This is JSON, right? JavaScript object notation. The prompt was generate a list of 3 made-up book titles along with their authors and genres. Let's say I'm working on my personal project and it's a book review app. Well, it's really useful to have fake data so I can actually run my program with data in it and see how it works. I think that's a really good use case for these AI tools is coming up with sample data or fake data. And when I do that, I can tell the AI to give it to me in a structured format that I can use in my program. So this is really simple, right? But it makes a huge difference. Makes a huge difference. If I do this without it, I get this. And this is great to read. And here again, we see the pattern matching, right? Like these sound more or less right. Though Whispers in the Space Market is, I have to say, a pretty shoddy title. But the Clockmaker's Paradox, I could see that. Dancing with Algorithms, I don't know about. But if I want to use this as fake data in my program, this is actually not that useful. And that one extra sentence of telling the AI what format I want the output in is incredibly useful. Or, you know, maybe I'm working on a website and I just want some fake data. But you know what? I don't want CSS because I'm going to add my own. This is a little hard to see when I'm not getting the nice preview for some reason. And this is actually a good example of domain knowledge too. We'll talk about it later, but HTML tables aren't really used anymore. And this is a really bad practice with HTML. So I would say don't use HTML tables, make a full HTML doc and with an H1 title and give me different section for each book and an H2 book title for each section. Now, to go back to my point about domain knowledge, if you're not already relatively skilled with HTML, you know, this is a much harder task to accomplish. But because I've written a whole bunch of HTML, I'm not an expert, but I definitely know what I'm doing. You know, this didn't, and for some reason, the this part didn't go in the HTML doc and whatever. But this more or less gives me what I want, right? And in fact, I can refine it and I can say, make author and genre bold. And it'll do it again, and it gives it bold tags. And in fact, it's better to use the strong tag in HTML than bold, which we'll talk about later. But the point being is because I kind of have the knowledge already, I can use this to go faster. This also shows another prompting technique, which is sort of iterative back and forth with it and treating it sort of like an idiot savant assistant, right? It's a lot easier to tell it to refine than it is to try and come up with one master prompt that does everything. And actually, before I move on, do folks have any questions or requests or things that you're curious about? And is it helpful to sort of see this in action? Cool. Um, so these examples are good to see. The other tactics about checking conditions are satisfied. There's something called few shot prompting, which is just a fancy term for giving examples. Um, and this is a good one. Um, so actually I'll copy and paste this in. I'm giving the AI context. I'm structuring the input I give it, and I'm giving it an example. And this is how a lot of these sort of bots are made. Um, tell me about happiness. So I screwed up my prompt here. Let's try it again. You are a wise question answering bot. Each of my subsequent questions you should answer in the style below. Below is a question response example of how to answer my subsequent questions, each of which will begin with tell me. And the coloration and the formatting is just something from copying and pasting from a markdown file, I think. And in fact, the AI was smart enough to go back and deal with my previous one correctly. But let's do, tell me about, what should we ask it about? We've done happiness, we've done patience, we've done resilience. Any requests?
Revenge.
Yeah, I love it. And if we tried to make the AI like talk about like revenge is a dish best served cold or like a more positive interpretation, we would probably fail because it's been programmed to avoid those things for safety reasons, which can be interesting to try and watch the AI twist its own tail. Um, and it's done a pretty good job, right? This is a pretty solid answer. So imagine that we're making some sort of game. All of a sudden, we have this incredible power where we can like generate tons of content for our game with this AI that might take a whole bunch of work before. Or so there's a lot of really exciting stuff about this. Um, Sometimes we might need to specify steps. And so in this example, we have text that is a poem, and a bad prompt would say, translate it into French, give me all the names, and give me a dictionary with the summary and the list of names. These days, the AI would probably do just fine. But if I structure my prompt more, and again, think pseudocode, right? Step one, step two, step three, step four, I have a much higher chance of getting good output consistently from the AI, and I'm giving it an output format. And the last one is, and you can do this, and I've done this with code. Like I will sometimes use ChatGPT or Claude to generate code because I'm experimenting something or I'm trying something out. And I see that something is not right. I will paste the code back in and ask it, is that correct? And it says, no, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. The correct code is blah, 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 blah. Which again just goes to a point about these things. And here's another example of hallucination, and let's see if this hallucination works. We have a made up product that sounds a lot like some sort of razor by Gillette, though it's a toothbrush by a company that sounds suspiciously similar to some other company. And actually, it did quite well. And I guess Boy is indeed a real company. So it keeps getting better and better with hallucination. Um, all right, what I want to do now is just demo using ChatGPT to put some of these into practice now that I've shown some examples. Um, and then if we have time, maybe show how to kind of interact with the ChatGPT API. And also I want to show you guys a resource. And then we can wrap up. And just to give you all a preview, the main assignment, I apologize, I lost track here. So there's a reading assignment that's good, but the main assignment is actually we want you to try and use ChatGPT or Claude or one of these AIs to create a tic-tac-toe terminal game in Python where you don't generate any code yourself and you're not allowed to modify the code that ChatGPT generates. This is the only time we'll want you to use the generated code. And only use prompt engineering to create this tic-tac-toe game. And we've given you a really high level outline. There should be a human player turn, a computer player turn. You need to get the human player's input for the move. You need to be able to print the board to the command line, with, lines and stuff to show the board. You should check after the move to see if someone, this should be one, WON, or if we have a cats game, which is a tie. Make it have a computer AI. It can be dumb and simple, but eventually smart. And then we have some more. Basically, this isn't quite pseudocode, but it's a pretty thoughtful specification of the features of this program, the flow of the UI, and like the game flow of the program and the program's behavior, right? And this is the kind of thing that even if we were writing a tic-tac-toe program ourselves, taking the time to sort of write out this pseudocode and this sort of design specification is actually really helpful, right? And I'm not thinking about functions or classes or lists or dictionaries or anything like that. I'm thinking at a higher level. And we have another typo here that we have to fix. And this is actually the right level to practice thinking at and writing stuff down at. And I'll put all this in comments when I'm designing a program. So I think this will be a lot of fun. Do folks have any questions, or are you curious about anything before I sort of move on to do another prompt engineering demo? Okay, cool. Let me grab ChatGPT. And also let me pull up the ChatGPT chat I was using before as a reference so I can walk us through this. Give me just one moment here. So I'm going to show two examples. One is how to cook steak, and we're going to see how to improve the quality of the questions that I ask and refine it. Right, this is not a great question. It's pretty broad. I'm going to get a pretty long answer. I suspect, let's see, yep, and we'll wait till it's done. And it's one particular way of cooking steak, right? And if I'm writing a recipe book, maybe I want a lot of different ways, right? Or if I'm designing a user interface. So maybe I want to say, write a one paragraph summary on different ways to cook steak. And we'll give it a minute and it'll come up with it. But now I get this really long paragraph. And you know what? That's not really what I want. I want it shorter. And I want it to sound more fun. And I want it to have emojis. And in fact, this is how we generate the YouTube lesson descriptions. I stick in the learning objectives. I basically give it a prompt like this for the YouTube videos. Now I'm going to tell it, keep exactly that paragraph so I don't lose it. And pretend you are writing a cookbook for teens, and after that paragraph, add a short step-by-step recipe on how to grill steak. And so again, this is a contrived example, but you can see how when you start to see how to ask good questions or structure good prompts, you can get a whole lot of flexibility. Let's say I change my mind and say, keep exactly the same instructions and content, but modify the tone of the language as if you were making a cookbook for vegetarians who have decided to eat meat. And so as you can see, I really like the iterative prompting. I have learned I have to tell the AI to keep the parts I want. Otherwise, as I keep prompting, it will lose stuff. I think I've in fact maybe over-engineered because I want maybe a little more in the language here that is about the vegetarians. Modify the language a bit so the tone focuses more on the vegetarian transitioning to eat meat. And let's make it like a teenage vegetarian transitioning to eat meat. And let's see if we get differences. It looks like it's almost exactly the same. Change the language more to match the tone. And it looks, here we go. Let's see if this does anything different. Let's see, we had grill it for that smoky flavor. Now we have grill it for that smoky vibe. And so there's a bit of change here. Honestly, at this point, I'm probably better off just continuing to edit and work on this myself. But you got to see a question get progressively more focused, and then I added a context, and then I did a little bit of prompting and guiding. Let's see if I can find I think there might have been one more example I wanted to share, but we've covered really most of the main points here. Oh, I wanted to use it for prompt engineering. So let me do the same example, but with prompt engineering. So we start with this very large, overly broad question. And some of this is useful. Some of this is not. I want to condense it into a shorter paragraph. Give me 4 key bullet points with the most actionable information. And now, if my goal is to have a little bit of a sort of tutorial on prompt engineering, this is way better, right? It's shorter, it's clearer, it's more direct. Keep the exact language, but put it in GitHub flavored Markdown, right? And we use this to help us with curriculum, but we still end up doing more modifying. But again, I just want to show the power of specifying the format. Let's say I want, don't do Markdown. I'm going to keep it non-Markdown for us to see it easier. Add a simple example of good clarity prompting, of good specificity prompting, and bad specificity prompting, with the example being about dogs. Excuse me. And just to sort of continue this, let's give it a role. You are helping me create a prompt engineering lesson for dog trainers. The doc you just created is a draft. Excuse me. Now build on the dog scenario and add an example of context and make the context that we are gathering info for a website on dog trainers. And let me scroll down so we can see what it's doing. So it keeps what we have. We have some examples. It kind of got off track a bit. I think my prompts got a little confused, and I needed to make my prompt a bit clearer and focus on which one I was doing. But you can see how I can kind of build on and add all these bits. And then just to show again, we can output all of this exactly as is, but in HTML5, do not include CSS. And this is actually kind of nice because now I've got an HTML page that talks about prompt engineering for dog trainers. So I think the tic-tac-toe exercise will be a lot of fun in this regard. Hopefully seeing this was useful. There's one more thing I want to show you guys, but this is really the bulk of the prompt engineering question or lesson. I just want to see if folks have questions or if there's anything that you are curious about. And how are we feeling about sort of maybe prompt engineering and being able to more effectively leverage ChatGPT?
I thought this was all pretty interesting because I never even used this at all before. I just kind of felt like it was a crutch to stay away from as far as
Yeah,
my learning process until now, I guess.
I appreciate that you thought that way, and I feel very grateful. I think that most Code Platoon students do, because there absolutely is a real risk here, right? Because this can generate solutions to most of the coding assignments. And so I feel very lucky that, most of you understand that, if you do that, you're shortchanging your own learning. Um, and I think it's about, if you think of it as a tool to help you understand things and learn more things and not generate code, that will kind of take you on the right path. And the more you do that, you'll eventually get to a point where you can say, all right, I wanted to make a regex to figure out if a sentence has a day of the week in it. We haven't really talked about regex, and it's not worth getting into. This is actually way simpler than I thought. Regex is one programming area that I'm just not very good at, and it's of medium value. It's not high value, it's not low value. You know, so the more experience you get, eventually you might use this to generate tests. You might use it to generate boilerplate. But for right now, I think thinking of it as like a sort of idiot savant tutor in some ways, or like research assistant, is really good. And Jason, I'm glad that it was useful. And I agree. I've kind of had to force myself to use this stuff because I'm so used to Googling things. I think that, those of you in the sort of younger generation, for lack of a better term, and certainly current CS undergrads, like the same way, I think we all grew up searching for stuff on the internet. Like now, like using these AI tools instead of Googling is becoming the norm. The last thing I want to show you is Anthropic, the company that makes that Claude AI that I like. They have an interactive prompt engineering tutorial course that's pretty new that actually we just found out about. It's a bit complex, and I'm going to share the link, but we just learned about it, and it honestly might be a bit too big as a coding assignment. But what it also does is it shows you how to write Python code to do these prompts. Because the incredible thing about these tools is that if we want to use the ChatGPT API, in my Python code, I'm writing those same English sentences that you saw me write just now, which is amazing. So let me show you what this looks like and walk you through it a bit so you all can dig into it more now or later if you want. This Amazon Bedrock bit we can ignore. We want to go right in here. We're actually going to learn what these .ipynb files are 2 weeks from now. They're called Jupyter notebooks. If you open it in VS Code, it lets you see text and run Python code at the same time. If I open this in GitHub, it looks like this. And let me actually show you all what this is like in VS Code. And let's just close this out and we can do it. This is sort of the flow that I use. I'm going to go to my code directory. I'm going to clone their repo. We're not going to be pushing anything to their repo. And if you want to, you can make a copy for your own repo. But let me show you what I mean when I'm talking about Jupyter notebooks. And why the heck I'm hearing about Google Gemini Code Assist in VS Code, I don't know. But it does make me curious about it. Google has Gemini. Microsoft bought a huge part of OpenAI, so they have that in GitHub Copilot. And then Anthropic is its own company. So if I click on this file, it's called a Jupyter notebook, Jupyter with a Y of all things. There's some install steps that it wants me to run. And in fact, I'll just go ahead and run this install step. I have my virtual environment activated and I'll do pip install Anthropic. And this is their API to interact with their AI. And let me drag down my terminal so we can see. So Jupyter notebooks are cool because if I click in here, I can actually modify this code and run it and see the output of it. So it looks like there's some install steps and some extra steps. As I said, I kind of just found out about this recently. So this is not sort of official. Just to show you all the example here of modifying code. Let's see if we can if they let us modify this. Yeah, I'm not sure if it lets me modify that cell, and I don't want to. Let's insert one below. So I can type Python here, and then I can actually run it, and we see that output right there. And that's what a Jupyter notebook is. And it's used a ton in data science, and thus, because data science is so closely related to all this data we need to train for AI, it's used a ton in AI and machine learning. We'll learn about this more 2 weeks from now. So it walks us through this stuff. And to do this tutorial, you do need to sign up for a free account with Anthropic and put the API key there. So I'm not going to go through this. Let's see if I can get this working. We're almost at time, so if I can get it working, then it's the perfect time to wrap up. And again, I do have the paid account, but you can sign up for a free account, and that should work just fine for this tutorial. I think I have it on a different one actually, so let's just fill this out. Let's see where we do here. There we go. So I probably need to go to settings, and then I need to go to API keys, and then I need to create one. Doesn't really matter what we call it. You need to save this because if you lose it, you can't find it here again. So I usually put these in a text file somewhere. I'm not going to worry about it too much for now, but just so you know, and you can always create a new one. And you'll want to save it somewhere because I'm not sure it will be like saved in this Jupyter notebook file. I wouldn't want to rely on that. But let's put that in there and save this. And then I guess we run this. And now I think we go through this in order, and it has, as you can see, the Python code. I think that already happened on the command line. It imports stuff. I'm honestly not quite sure what's going on here. They'll sort of talk about this. It uses, I think it uses our API key variable, or I may have to paste it in. As I said, I was doing some homework before this lesson and literally just found out about this a little while ago. So this is new to me as well. If we can get to a point where it runs, that would be awesome. I'm just not sure. Here we go. Here's an example. So, you can kind of go through the tutorial to figure it out, but in essence, this program client will talk to the Claude AI over the internet through HTTP requests to its REST API, which we learn about much later in the course. We create this Python function named getCompletion. We give it a plain English prompt, and here are like settings for the prompt that we get to give it. And so now I'm using that function to say hello, and let's see if this works. Yeah, and it failed. So I'm not going to fiddle with this too much right now, because I feel like this is probably already borderline confusing. But the fact that they have this whole prompt engineering course and that it walks you through how to write Python code to send these prompts and that it's interactive like this, I just find incredible. So I did want to at least expose that to you, and I'll share the link. Start with the tic-tac-toe. Don't worry about this Anthropic tutorial thing. The tic-tac-toe prompt engineering assignment, you're going to get way more value out of anyway, and it'll help you see the strengths and weaknesses of ChatGPT better. That was the last thing I wanted to show you. Thankfully, we're now, out of the super long lesson stage. So this is the end of the prompt engineering lesson, and we have some work time before the team stand downs at 4:30, and then the class stand down at 5. We'll return to the AI stuff like not next week, but the week after. Next week is going to be OOP. Do folks have any questions or are curious about stuff before we wrap up?
Can you show in the GitHub repo where that assignment was?
Oh, the tic-tac-toe one?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you hop over in the curriculum to our current week, oh, you know what? I apologize because it is hiding here in the AI one. So let me put all of this in Slack actually for you. I'm going to put this in the Zulu channel right now. Most of our curriculum is sequential, but we do teach this prompt engineering lesson early so that you all can start to leverage ChatGPT to help with error messages. And then the data science stuff and the data structures and algorithm stuff, like we'll see like one of these a week. Otherwise, except for that, and then personal and group projects are a little different. We basically go straight through. Um, so again, that was hiding in here, and then down here is that link to the assignment.
I guess I'm a little confused on what we're supposed to be working on because I was looking at the terminal phone one. Isn't that what we should be working on?
Um, well, you raise a good point. You all actually now have like a whole bunch of different assignments. Because I've just given you this prompt engineering one. The terminal phone one is really like a team project. Um, and then I'm going to give you a practice assessment at the end of the day. And Jack, actually, you're probably right. I would actually suggest, we did the teams this morning. I would say work on the terminal phone thing this afternoon. It might just be planning. You guys might not even end up writing code, or you might get to writing code. And then, check in with Max and James, but you guys can use the team stand down to work on the team terminal phone assignment too. Um, After that, uh, probably the practice assessment is the next priority. Um, Jack, you touched on a good point because we have hit the point in the course now where there will be a deluge of coding assignments. And Francisco and I will make sure to highlight the most important ones. There will be more than you can probably realistically get done, which is in part by design. So there's always something for people to do. Um, I'll give you guys a prioritized list in Slack, but yeah, do the terminal phone one. And then it's probably the practice assessment. I feel like this tic-tac-toe one would be really good, but there's so much good stuff to do this week. I'm not sure it goes at the top of the list. Um, if if you guys can get through everything this weekend, I think that would really benefit you because there's a lot that will flex your Python muscles and it'll set you up well for next week. That said, I recognize that that's a very full plate. So, please do like whenever you guys feel like there's a lot of coding assignments, please do check in about what you guys should be focusing on because there genuinely is a lot. So, Jack, thank you for asking about that. Any other questions or things people are curious about before we wrap?